You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Today I head north to Toronto, Canada to talk with Amanda Ono, VP Customer Experience and VP People and Culture at Resolver, a Kroll business. With over 20 years of international experience in organizational development, HR consulting, and change management, Amanda brings a well-blended background into her leadership of customer experience, including a very global perspective. In fact, with 25 countries under her belt, she's hit every continent except for Antarctica. As an aside, listeners, I've had guests from every continent except for Antarctica, so I haven't given up hope. So anyone out there that knows a scientist or anyone else from Antarctica, send me an email. I want to get them on the show. Definitely want to hit all my continents. Now, Amanda didn't start her career intending to be in customer experience. Somehow, those psychology classes she took fully with the intention of being a therapist teased out this curiosity in organizational behavior and how psychology interacts with corporate decisions. Further in her career, there are moments of sales, of marketing, of learning and development. All of that brought her to the current role at Resolver, blending customer experience, people, and culture. When we talked earlier, Amanda mentioned something to me. The idea of a new CX sheriff in town, change leadership. I want to find out more about that. And what's this about a 5-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia? Yeah. Amanda, welcome to CX Passport.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's have a little bit of fun today. Now, I want to start right off the bat with that CX sheriff, that new CX sheriff in town. What do you mean by change leadership, and why is that the new CX sheriff?
Yes, I love this question. I mean, I think you have to start with the premise that generally people don't like change. I know it's socially acceptable to say you like change,
Sure.
roll with it, and you want to be agile and you want to be all the things. But do we really? Most of us, we like to wake up, we like a routine, we like structure. And so, at the end of the day, in my experience, change management is, builds off this great framework. It really looks at, what's the change you need to bring people through? What are the processes? What are the steps? What are the systems? So that's great and all, but it's actually the leadership that becomes the thread that ties through the change, that becomes the thing that makes change happen.
Okay.
And so, in my journey, in my experience, and, I've had some exposure from a global perspective, also had exposure, doing acquisitions. It's really the leadership that's going to make the biggest difference for people to orient to change.
Tell me, though, that the leadership part of it, like I get that, right? It's not just steps and processes and checkboxes, because if that were the case, then, well, you would just release a sheet of paper and then every massive change initiative would take 7 days and you'd just be done with it. But how does that tie to customer experience? Why is that the new customer experience sheriff, this change leadership aspect of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think when you're going through a customer journey with folks, they are going through a change. It could be a change in the technology that they have, the systems that they have, any range of things. And so, too often, and especially we see this in a software world, is people think about it as implementing a software. But the software is probably 20% of the change. There's a wider change that's happening. There's first and foremost, a shift in, actual processes that are going to be running. There's a shift in team behaviors and sometimes team dynamics. There's a shift in where people actually click from day to day. And I wouldn't under index on that. I've certainly done software implementations where just looking, helping someone look at the right side of the screen versus the left side of the screen took, a ton of coaching. And anyone that's done systems training, would know that that's true.
Yeah.
And so, I really think that, sitting in the customer seat and thinking about the change that they have to go through and the deeper behaviors that are inherent in those change is truly what's going to make a change sticky. And you hit it spot on when you think about a big sheet of paper. I think a lot of people still look at that. And, I think you have to have a plan. Certainly I've been part of turnarounds where, you want to draw out a plan, but there does need to be that agility to say, as we get going and as we get moving, the map that we laid out needs to take a different course. We need to take a detour. And I think, the success of the change will be very predicated on people's ability to take a detour or not.
That is absolutely right. And it does make sense to me now that, because we've heard how important change management is and how important that is, but it's making more sense to me now why that is the customer experience sheriff, why that is driving that forward. And I think a lot of it comes down to what you're describing, having this understanding of the customer, or, it's the cliche word, but it's so true, empathizing with those who are experiencing the change. It helps if you have that sense of empathy for sure. But it really helps if you've done it before. You'd mentioned to me when we were talking earlier that there was a mentor that told you, hold off, don't get your master's right away so that you could experience the work world. You also have shared with me that you have installed software before, not just guided, but you've been the installer, been there doing that, so you can really better understand your customers' needs today. And those two are very related to me. So why is it so important to get into the real world? Why is it so important to get into your actual customer's experience when you're trying to create this great customer experience?
Yeah, I think this is where, again, how we think about things practically versus a textbook is so important. And you can have
Amen.
you can have the best laid plans, and when they get put into the wild, it becomes such a different reality. I think for me, if you go back to using the example you used before of what you draw out on a big piece of paper, I think when you're drawing processes for customers, you often think about your organization's internal efficiency,
Mm.
which is right. You definitely want to get that right. You don't want to do things that are inefficient, but have you sat in the customer chair, and have you asked as you go through this process, am I building this process for me as the company, or am I building it for the customer?
Mhm.
And I've really leaned into the concept that Amazon made famous, talking about putting an empty chair
Yeah.
in customer process meetings. I think it's really important. And as we were building new processes for scale at Resolver, that was a big part of what I did. I was, taking over this team. I was engaged to be part of a turnaround because our team was having issues with efficiency. We were having issues managing scope. We had consultant burnout, but all of this customers were still really happy. And so, the question was, how do we continue to make them happy and continue to serve them moving forward
Right.
by creating processes both internally and for them that will make a big difference.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport. Leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
The idea of getting off that piece of paper and designing for your internal work, like outside in, inside out, these are all phrases, but it is so true that we've seen experiences that are designed in the boardroom, in the conference room, that just absolutely flop when they get out into the real world. And that's the point of testing. That's the point of user validation, all the different things that go into that. But it does surprise me how many companies don't have that as a part of their natural rhythm, and that introduction, be it the chair, be it playing calls from customers, reviewing emails inside of meetings, that they don't bring that customer life into the company directly. And it shows. It shows that it's designed without that customer in mind.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an agreement and a philosophical approach that you have to have as a company. And honestly, it can take more work, right? An iterative cycle
Yeah.
where you're continually changing
Yeah.
does take more work. And that's why some companies don't want to sign up for it, because they want to do the process. They want to run the process and then come back to it a year from now and decide whether it worked or not. At Resolver, we've really focused on how do we build things iteratively? How do
Yeah.
we, test and put it out there? We've also found specifically within software implementations that is an approach that is, better for the customers themselves. They get to be part of feedback. I think there's a lot of customers that like being part of beta groups that
Yeah.
are testing and trialing things.
Yeah.
And certainly, we lean into that pretty hard.
The Ooh, that brings up a question that I've always wanted to ask, and I just have never had the opportunity to ask someone about that. But you bring up these user groups, and it's a bit of a. I wasn't thinking about this initially, but those that are the most eager to be a part of that, do you ever worry about, is that the right input? Is it? I want to actually hear from those that couldn't care less about being a part of my user group. How do you balance that sort of tension between the eagerly engaged and those who really don't? They may love your product, but just don't want to sit in a focus group.
For sure. I mean, you have to look at the N of one, or the vocal minority that
Yeah.
can work good or bad.
That's right.
I think we've always just looked at it as it's a data point, and there has to be multiple data points. I think, anytime you're in a software company and you're building, it has to be multiple sources of truth,
Yeah.
to get to the point where we're building something that we believe is going to be great. So I think it's easy to skew. I think you run the risk of being like a soccer team of 4-year-olds where you're all running around the ball. No one's able to put it in the net. And so, I think at the end of the day, you have to really balance it.
Yeah.
And also acknowledge that, sometimes the reality, especially in a software world, is a customer might not know what they want yet. And
Yeah.
part of our role is to have that market research that really gives them, the best deliverable possible.
I do like that, and now I'm going to have the image of 4-year-old soccer teams, because having had a child who played soccer since he was 3, he's now in his 20s. I do recall those days, and it is an apt description of what you're describing there. And we're talking about up front, right? We're talking about the product, understanding product, where do we want to take the product, the iterations. This is true of customer experience on the other end too, where we're getting customer complaints, and that is gold. But it has to be balanced with, is this just the loudest complaint, or is this systemic across all of our customers, and making sure that we balance those data points. You did.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier talking about coming into a team and looking at it as a way of transforming it, improving it, making it better, more efficient, just understanding all of that. How have you really helped transform that team? Really, you alluded to some initial challenges, but I'm curious, how did you advance this team towards that customer centricity journey?
Yeah, this has been a big part of my journey over the past 2.5 years. And, so change is, I think sometimes people think change can happen quickly. It can happen quickly, but, change that is sticky takes a long time.
Yeah.
And so, I think when I started, again, as I said, there's a team that was having issues with efficiency, consultant burnout, a lot of the things that happen in CX teams. And so, when I was brought in, I think a big part of it was naming the change. This is where a little bit of my background in marketing comes in, but I think, we named it. We said, this is a lemon. We have a giant lemon in front of us, and what are we going to do with it? And, I was super proactive about posts that we did, town halls. I was doing skip meetings to talk to people at all levels to understand what they're facing. And the thing I like about naming a change is that when you are able to move on from the change, you can talk about your next chapter. And so, I would very distinctly name phases that we are going through as an organization. And, so phase 1 was build and succeed. Phase 2 was, learn and scale. And we kind of continued. And so as we moved through gateposts, I was helping psychologically move people also to say, okay, that chapter's done. We're kind of done the part that's really mucky, and we're going to move to the next thing. So that was, internal communications, I think, for change. That's where leadership is so important, because I think really so much of leadership is great communication and influencing people to want to buy in. I think a second thing we did was just get back to basics. Our operations weren't where we needed to be. And so, how do you get your data right? I think a lot of folks that sit in CX and who are leaders across disciplines, if you don't have your data, you don't have the insights. And I think that was a huge thing that we really had to focus early in our days, and then had to come back to it, because honestly, we sprinted to get our data in a good spot. And then a year later, we thought things were still moving, but they weren't. And so, I think it's also reminding yourself to not be complacent. I think a third thing we did, I'll just go over like kind of my top 3-4 things, but I think
you probably have a list of a dozen. Yes.
Yeah, I do. But yeah, top 3-4. We got, when you endeavor to a change, especially with a turnaround on a team, I mean, there's so much to fix. And, one thing the CEO, who's my coach, was really vigorous about was making sure that I was very narrow focused in priorities.
Okay.
I think, again, there's a lot you can do,
Yeah.
but how do you make sure you're really focusing on the things that will move the team really quickly. And then I think the fourth thing we really doubled down on was enablement. We were scaling our team. We've scaled our team by about 30% in year. And we hire people that are very engaged and want to be successful. So you have to build onboarding programs internally that allow your consultants to be successful. And, this goes back to, my belief that I think humans want to achieve great things. And so set them up to do that. We doubled down on a program that improved that efficiency. And, we improved ramp by 30%. And so that was a huge thing for us that allowed us to move our other priorities because consultants were in seat and they were able to be really effective quickly. So a lot of times people focus on hiring people. That's great.
Yeah.
But, onboarding them better is how you're really going to impact customers, because it means they're going to be in front of customers, consulting with them, engaging them with expertise and empathy in all the ways that you really want them to.
What I like about that, you're talking about transforming a team, and you're getting into some real practical elements there. Some of it we hear words like enablement and those kinds of things, but practically, okay, we hired wonderfully, but then how well did we onboard? What did that actually look like from onboarding? How can I stay narrow focused? How can I get back to the basics? It is so true that it feels like, oh, let's go off and do something nifty and novel and different. Well, you know what? Sometimes the basics, and this is true of what you're describing. It's true of customer support. It's true of just customer service overall. That, heck, we live it as customers today that the back to basics are so missing in many of our overall experiences that to hear you focusing on that when it comes to transformation makes a lot of sense.
I think that's one thing that Matt Dixon talks about in Effortless Experience, where he basically just says, customers just want what they want. And, yes, you want to delight them. Yes, that's the end goal. But did you deliver on what you said you were going to deliver on? And I think as we were going through this turnaround with the team, a big thing that I was focused on was, are we delivering on what we believe are table stakes?
Yeah.
And, it's easy to take on a new project. I think a lot of times as leaders, you want a new feather in your cap of something that is, really interesting and new and innovative, but that might not be the thing that moves the change. Sometimes the change is actually, doing the work and executing it, at an extremely high level.
That is so true. I could take what you just said and go off on an incredible tangent about a flight experience that I had this weekend where the back to the basics is what delighted my wife and me so much more than they try to surprise and delight, but the flight was late. I don't care how much you surprise and delight me. The flight was not on time. Get me there on time and I'm happy. And it was. The flight coming back on time was great. All right. I won't go down that path any further. Let's talk about a cooler flight and a cooler experience than just my weekend trip. This 5-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. First of all, it blows my mind just thinking about that. I'd love to hear some stories from the trip, but I'd also be curious, how did that trip influence sort of your perspective, your decisions even today?
Yeah, I was really lucky to be in this position to take a trip like this. So I graduated from university. I took a year to work and saved up so I could take a trip. Lots of folks that I knew were going to Europe. I think you said you did the same thing.
Yeah, I did that one.
Yeah, which is a great trip. I wanted to try something that was, a little bit different. And so we took a trip where it was myself and a roommate from university. We did Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Taiwan, and Japan. So it was an incredible experience. I think travel is so important. That was the first really kind of global trip that I had taken when I was 22. But, I think for me, there was a couple things that were just so inspirational for me. I would say first and foremost, just, I think travel fosters an enormous amount of empathy and perspective taking.
Yeah.
And I think that's so key in any role you take, but specifically in customer roles. I think a big thing for me too was just, I kind of think about it as human ingenuity. I'm a big sucker for archaeology. A bunch of the trips I've gone on in my life so far have been going to see things like Angkor Wat or Petra or Machu Picchu, and I was always wowed by what humans could build with very little technology. But on the other end of it, it's also looking at human resourcefulness. I've seen mattresses made of phone books. I've seen rafts propped up by water bottles. These are all people that, have limited resources, and, they're focusing on utility and not constraints.
Yeah.
And I think that was very formative for me to see that, I think sometimes, if you come from an environment where you have wealth and privilege, you focus on what you don't have. But I think there's so many places in the world where they focus on what they have, and they focus on the utility of it. And again, just that ingenuity, I think is, you really see in travel, that has been very inspiring for me. Resilience and adaptability, that comes time and time again.
Yeah.
If you've backpacked, you are taking detours probably daily.
Plans are just a joke.
Yeah, totally. I mean, bus schedules are misread. You don't have, things get canceled and it's not communicated, and you just kind of have to roll with it. And I think, one of the biggest things that was really, reinforced for me was, at the end of the day, you really have control of your perspective. You can't control what's happening to you, but you can control, okay, that's, my friend and I had the amusing to aggravating scale. And so in our heads, we're like, we'll just stick this on the amusing scale, because if we get aggravated, we're not much further. It doesn't mean we caught our bus all of a sudden. We're still sitting here in this border town, and we don't have our visas. So, that is that is the reality of it. But I think, the overall kind of came to this from some of our experiences where, again, we're on these detours. But truly, when you're traveling, was that, kindness begets kindness. And, in all the countries I've been to, I've just repeatedly seen the kindness of strangers. Specifically, I can recall on that particular backpacking trip, but I have dozens of stories like this. But on that particular backpacking trip, we had, my friend and I had missed a bus, and the person who owned the dive shop said, you're not going to get a bus for a day. And, that obviously, when you're backpacking, really kind of, puts a kink in your plans. And so, he offered, he said, I'll drive you. It's fine. It is out of my way, but I'll take you there. I'll just go a bit early to do my drop off that I need to do. And he made sure that we got there, and we got there on time, and made sure we understood where we were going. And there's so many stories of kindness I have as a backpacker. I've also been a female solo backpacker, and I've seen the same thing. I think generally, if you the vast majority of humans are good. You put it out, and if you're kind to people, you do get it back. And a smile and a laugh is universal.
With all of that, 5 months of backpacking, yes, absolutely, we're talking about constraints, and if you don't have, but sometimes it's nice to be comfortable too. And so Let's take a little break here. Let's go to the first class lounge, which probably didn't exist for you during a backpacking trip. It didn't during mine, but oh, how I would have wanted it. So here, you're in the first class lounge. Let's move quickly here and have a little fun. What is a dream travel location from your past?
Dream travel location was definitely going to the Mount Fuji region of Japan.
Ooh, very nice. I'm actually going there in December, January. Tell me more.
Oh, it's incredible. It's very, it's small, it's very quaint, but super accessible to get around by bus, which is great. Transportation in Japan is just, blows your mind, with how good it is. But they have this incredible bike trail, that you can go around the lake that sits under Mount Fuji, which was just an incredible experience. So if you can do that, if you can get your hands on some bikes, highly recommend that.
See, and folks think that I do this podcast to talk about customer experience and let my guests share the wisdom. No, it's all selfish. I just want to get travel tips from people. Tips. Everything else is just fluff or nut around. No, of course, I love all the other stuff too, but thank you for that tip. What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
I'd really like to go to kind of Argentina,
Yeah.
Chile
Yeah.
way. And, I think there's this great opportunity to, hike to areas of Patagonia.
Hmm.
But I think there's also great culture in that
Mm.
region. The trips I tend to pick usually have a combination of some sort of hike and outdoor, but as well city and great wine and food. So,
Nice.
that's a region of the world further down in South America I've not yet been to, and I would love to do that.
And maybe get a little hop over to Antarctica. There, you could check that one
That
off the box. There, you're almost
hey,
there.
and then you've done it.
Yeah, that's right.
We've played the travel bingo.
There it is. All right. Now you mentioned food and wine, absolutely, in travel. What is a favorite thing of yours to eat?
I love exploring food in different regions. Probably okay, so I'll share a favorite thing to eat. So most countries in the world have some combination of meat wrapped in some bread. So everywhere I go, I'm going to try whatever that combination is. So
Yeah.
if it's an empanada, or what they have in Jordan, some sort of wrap, I'm always going to try that because
Mhm.
I love seeing what they've done from a flavor combination. But probably the most interesting thing I got to eat was when we were in Jordan, and the Bedouin community. They do a slow roast, and they dig a giant hole in the desert, and they put a full goat in it, and they roast it for a day. And then the next day they come out and they skewer it off, and they put it into a very fresh pita. So that was my best experience that way, and probably the most unique because most people aren't eating from holes in the desert. So that was pretty incredible.
Now, I do have to tell you that sounds incredibly unique, but you may need to go to the American South where they do some pig pickings, where they do dig a hole in the ground and roast a pig. But yes,
Fair, yeah.
so you don't have, but I bet that was some of the best meat. That had to be
It
incredibly
was
tender, that goat meat. It
delicious.
must have been awesome. Now,
Yeah.
hate to ask this after that, but the flip side of that, what is a thing that your parents forced you to eat, but you hated as a kid?
They used to do this on Fridays, like a frozen fish. And now I love fish. I eat it regularly, but I
Right.
eat it when it's fresh and hasn't been, frozen for a couple years. But yeah, it didn't matter how much tartar sauce was on that. It was just never going to taste
That's
good.
awesome. No
Yeah.
fish sticks for you anymore. No fish
Yeah.
sticks back then and no fish sticks now. I love it. What is, with all your travels, one travel item, not including your phone, that you will not leave home without?
Comfortable shoes. My best shoes are on my feet when I travel.
Going back to customer experience and inside of a company, one of the challenges that any company, but especially those that are focused on product and digital product, is that product is always evolving. Heck, you talked about how it's intentionally iterative. And so, how does a service team fill those gaps while the product is still evolving? This evolution is going forward. How is the service team filling those gaps?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think, so much of what a services team does in a software company is really consult with a customer on what are they trying to solve. And so I think, it's going back to that change leadership is if you think about an implementation as checking a box and configuring for a customer, you're maybe missing the bigger piece. And, there are times in all technologies where the technology can't solve everything that the customer wants, but can consulting on the overall change that you're trying to drive for the customer help fill in the gaps? And the answer is yes.
Mm.
And that's why I go back to, really, I believe, and when I've done software implementations internally, and when I've been a customer implementing softwares at Resolver, there's always things internally where you are really trying to adjust a process, you're trying to adjust team behaviors, and your outcome is to get insights. But that's the end game. And so I think,
Mm.
really enabling our professional services organization to engage our customers by talking to them about what process are you trying to build, where are you currently, and where would you like to go? Tell us about the teams that are engaging with this. I think actually helping name that change for the customer
Mm.
is important. We spend time with our customers, especially on large scale enterprise implementations that are multiple months, multiple phases, multiple teams, all the multiples. We spend time, canvassing what the change looks like.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, but, I think just helping a customer at the beginning of any engagement visualize the change that they're about to go through and understanding that it's big and there's lots of moving parts to it, helps align the customer to a partnership.
Nice. I like that idea. The naming it up front, partnering, all of it goes into that. Brilliant. I love hearing that. I think that's a great approach there. Now, as I often do, I realize, oh my gosh, I want to ask you so many more questions, and yet I'm very short on time and looking at the clock here. But I'm curious, just as the head of CX, as the head of customer experience, what are you focusing on these days? What are some of the challenges you're seeing in CX, or even some of the things that are kind of delighting you in customer experience?
I think the thing, one of the biggest things that we're really starting to put our eyes on is, how do you do customer enablement? So helping give tools and learning to customers in ways that still feel high touch. Because, it's very easy to say, okay, here's your self-directed learning. You don't need a human anymore. But from what we hear from our customers, they still want a human.
Mhm.
And so, they want something that will supplement their knowledge and enable them to learn faster and get it implemented in our software faster, but they still want a human. And so I think right now, one of the things we're trying to solve is how do we balance that in a way that is going to be really effective. So I think, you can automate certain things, you can processize certain things. That's great. But at the end of the day, humans still buy from humans. They still partner with humans. And so how do you continue to, round out both of those? So we're working on that. That's maybe you can invite me back and I'll tell you when we figure that out. But, that's the thing we're really trying to solve. And I think, there's definitely companies out there that have swung really hard to self-service. I think if you can do that model and that serves your customer base, I think that's fantastic. It just so happens that our customer base, really tells us that blend of both is going to be important to them.
Yeah, I really like that because having spent more time kind of downstream in the customer service side and that aspect, I am fatigued with and frustrated by the hyper focus on digitalization and the deflection and all of that, as opposed to how can we do what the customers want digitally? Great. And how can we reserve what they want to be done by a human to be done by a human? Great. And man, it sounds like that's exactly the approach you're taking. And so I admire that and glad to see that. Now, if other folks admire that, want to learn more about you, want to learn more about Resolver, what's the best way to get in touch with you and learn more about Resolver?
Yeah, definitely. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Amanda Ono. There's not many of us in Toronto. So yeah, you can feel free to connect with me. And Resolver, the best way to find us is just resolver.com. Lots of great information on the things we're solving for customers to get over that risk divide and really have the data and intelligence they need to make great decisions for their organization. So yeah, I would love to connect with folks.
That's awesome. I will get all of that in the show notes. Just scroll down, you see the links right there, and you've got access to it. Amanda, thanks so much for the conversation. You've taken us literally all over the globe. Well, I guess not literally. Nope, let's back that up. Amanda, you've taken us all over the globe metaphorically, and it has been wonderful to hear those stories, your experiences, and how that has driven who you are as a customer experience leader, how you've gone through that transformation, how you're helping that human-to-human element of customers stay real and stay relevant. Love hearing it. It was wonderful talking with Amanda today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.